Welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. When you're ready to transform your sales for today's transforming market, we've got you covered with your host, the queen of cold calling and founder of Salesology, award-winning author, speaker, sales trainer, and coach, Wendy Weiss.
Hi, welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. And I'm your host, Wendy Weiss. I am the founder of Salesology, creator of the Salesology prospecting method, and I'm also known as the queen of cold calling. And today, my very, very special guest is Benny Rubin. He is the CEO at Senders. And Benny's an email deliverability expert. He is a 3-time entrepreneur with 1 sale, 1 failure, and now his current company, Senders. And Benny has a wide view of what's working in sales, cold email, email deliverability, and sales team execution. His team has overseen cold emails that have generated hundreds of millions of dollars in pipeline and garnered interested responses from massive companies such as Starbucks, Visa, Equinox, Coca-Cola, and more. And Benny is eager to demystify cold emailing and debunk common myths. And he's here to give advice to anyone willing and trying to grow anything on how they can leverage cold email while avoiding the spam filter. And Benny also lived and worked for 7 years in Japan. He has a degree in music, violin, viola, and electric bass. And he even toured on bass for a Sony artist. So welcome, Benny.
Thanks, Wendy. I feel welcome. It's funny. It's a funny way to start any conversation. It makes it easier because then you can reference your own bio, but then it also makes it funny because you have to hear your whole life flash before your eyes.
With accolades.
That's true. Well, there wasn't any bad stuff in there, that's for sure.
No bad stuff, but since either you or your mother wrote it, there wouldn't be any bad stuff, right?
I actually wonder how much, I don't know if my mom could successfully complete a survey of my career. She's probably like, you were doing something for a while and that seemed nice and you has it would be very like,
well, maybe we need to get her on here. I'll interview her. We'll see what happens. And
she'd be great.
So I do want to ask you before we jump into cold email, what is your backstory? How did you become the CEO of Senders? How did that happen?
Well, Senders is a company that I started. And other than a few stints here and there where I did longer contracts, I've always worked for myself. And I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with working for other people. And I actually like to hire people and work with people that have done long engagements with other companies. But in my personal life, I always thought that working for yourself seemed a little bit easier to understand. It seemed a little bit more natural. And so I started in my entrepreneurial journey when I was maybe 24 or so. And it wasn't any big notions of I want to be free or I don't want this or I don't want that. It was more, there was a lot of opportunity, I felt. And there was a lot of cross-pollination and sort of going from company to company seemed a lot more fun and engaging. And the math usually works out in service businesses to where you can make more money by serving more people. And if you serve more people, oftentimes that leads to more professional satisfaction. So it becomes a sort of a win-win-win, if that makes sense. And I think that entrepreneurship, when you're very young, well, I'm not talking about 16, 17, I don't know about that, but in your early 20s, can be very fun and very lucrative because of the simple fact that your salary expectations are so low. So if you have something to give, you have something to provide, you can generate more money and cross-pollinate with a lot of different companies and make more money than you would if you were embedded with one company. Of course, you sacrifice all the learnings you get from being dedicated to one job. So that's a downside of it. But anyway, that my entrepreneurial journey started when I was in my early 20s. And I went from one thing to another, and then here I am now. And I'm definitely not in my early 20s anymore, even though I have TikTok hair. You all can't see it because you're listening on audio, but I have curly hair that's combed forward like some sort of TikTok weirdo, even though I'm not one.
That is true on both accounts. And so, how did you get into cold email?
Cold email used to be something relatively rare. I started my first company in Japan. I was in Tokyo, and the company was focused on servicing the major ad agencies there. This is the sort of dawn of social media. And I did sales the old fashioned way. The first iteration of it was selling to record labels, and there were very few record labels. And so I had to hustle up introductions to get in with those folks. And then I had to build very, very strong relationships with the people there in order to get contracts from them. So it was a sort of a classic, what they might call like an ABM style strategy. When I switched to selling into ad agencies, all of a sudden it went from 5 or 10 target clients to over 1,000. In Japan, I believe there's over, at least at the time, there was over 1,000 ad agencies. So right when you start to get into 1,000, and then you say, okay, well, there's all these digital managers at these agencies, there's all these account executives at the agencies, there's maybe 5 to 10 people that are interesting targets in each of these companies. The numbers start to get really big, 5,000, 10,000 people in your target market. That's when your marketing idea and concept changes, your sales concept changes, and you start to think about things like you're an expert in cold calling. Well, how many agencies could I call, and what would I say to them, and will they pick up? And right. And then the other side of this is, what is there another sort of more efficient way to do it? And so I started to cold email then and found it to be effective at the time. And from there, when I moved back to the States and I started my next company, that was the first port of call, so to speak. And I got pretty good at it there. And I had some mentors that helped me get better at it. And then when I shut that company down, and I asked all my entrepreneur friends, hey, what do you think I'm good at? What do you need help with? They're like, well, you're good at cold email, and cold email is kind of a mess. So why don't you do that? And then that's when I started this company. And then I shifted again around 2020 when I started to realize that cold email itself was getting simpler, but email deliverability was getting harder. So I hired folks, technical folks, and built up technical expertise in really understanding how email deliverability for cold email was going to be best done. And then that's the business that we have now. That's it. That's the whole story.
Okay.
You didn't interrupt me once.
I did not interrupt you once. And now I have another question. I'm going to switch gears because I need to know, since you are musician, what did your musical career teach you about business, or what impact did that musical career have in your success today?
So that's a bit of a trick question. I think that musicians have dual judgments against them. On one side, they can be seen as sort of capricious and sort of, like a rocker in some way. But I don't really come from that kind of background, although I did play a lot of rock music and such when I was a kid. I think that what most people who take learning something, anything, whether it's a sport or music, what you end up spending a lot of time doing is the same thing over and over and over again in slightly different conditions. For example, in a dance context, because that's what you might practice a perfectly isolated jump of some way, but then you're in the middle of a choreography, there's some sort of turn before that same kind of jump, and then there's all these things to transfer over, but really you're practicing repetition. You're repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating. And I think that most people are seeking some sort of novelty when they do business, and I'm not. I'm looking for repetition after repetition after repetition. So the first inning of this kind of work is a kind of confusion you really only get when you're given a really new context. So an example would be I play violin, and if I learn to play something on violin, whatever it is, and then you put a keyboard in front of me, well, your brain goes into crazy confusion mode, and you're desperately trying to figure out what notes they are. And but on the the violin, it's like this, but of course it's totally different than the keyboard now. So your brain goes in this confusion mode. That's how it is when you're trying to sell something new. Your brain is very confused, and you're also trying to convince someone of something, and you basically sound like some sort of weird person, and things aren't really cohesive. So it takes repetition after repetition after repetition to get really good at selling something. And if that thing you're selling is always changing and shifting because you're doing a custom pitch for everybody, you don't really develop that kind of strength. So I always gravitate towards um, selling things that can be sold over and over and over again, and where the number of variables is controllable and sort of limited. And those tend to lend themselves to, they sort of remind me, they sort of rhyme with what it felt like to practice music, or even to this day when I practice my instrument. Very different from performance. I think you in your methodology liken a performance, the sales act, to a performance. Maybe I'm mischaracterizing it, but in my view, I see that as practice. Does that make sense?
Well, I would say, first of all, it was not a trick question because I do believe that everything I know in life and business I learned in ballet class.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Um, but what I learned in ballet class was first you warm up so you don't hurt
Sure.
yourself, then you rehearse, repetition, and then you perform. And the problem is when it comes to sales, most people just jump right to the performance and they're winging it all the way. But
Mm,
if you've done the warm up and you've done the rehearsal, the repetition, you learn
sure.
your craft, you practice your craft, then you can actually execute.
Sure. I think that in a sales team scenario, what you just outlined is 100% necessary. I think that when you're inventing something to sell, it's a little bit more of a dialogue. Like you're sort of positing a concept to someone and being like, well, what if I did this on a monthly retainer instead of a one-time project? How would that make you feel? It's sort of like you're almost discussing with the choreographer like how this could be executed in a more fluid way. Like that's hard to do. What if we like that? That's how I feel when I'm doing sales, or at least in the early days. But what I was trying to say is that in order to get over the $1 million a year mark for this business, I estimate it took me about 1,000 hours of almost repetitive sales processes. So whether I was practicing with unknowing targets and flopping, or I was I was performing, or whatever, you could frame it however you want to, I definitely agree that it's the repetition that really gets you sales. And I find it very interesting when people come to me and say, well, I'm having a lot of trouble with this sales, with getting it over the line. I don't do sales coaching, so they should definitely hire you if they need sales coaching. I always ask, how many prospects have you spoken to so far? And they say, oh, 5 or 10. It's like, oh, okay, well, come back when you've done 100. It's like the number of repetitions you actually need in order to feel even somewhat fluid with something. It's astronomically more than I think. Well, I would say it's exponentially more. It's usually one exponent larger than people imagine um, they would they would be. And um, music or tennis or whatever can definitely teach you that. If you want to get better at your tennis swing, I'm not a tennis player, but you can imagine that it's not 10 swings, it's not 100 swings, it's not 1,000 swings. It's probably some pretty pretty incredible number of swings before you really start to feel comfortable. And then after that point, refining of the process takes even longer.
Absolutely. It sounds, Benny, like what I learned in ballet class and what you learned from being a musician is very similar. So,
I'm sure the differences are as fascinating as the similarities. But getting good at things is really hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. And that sounds like a silly thing to say, but it's not, it's hard. And usually it's not hard in the way that people imagine. It's hard mentally because you start to say, well, shouldn't I be better at this by now? And someone says, well, you've only tried to pitch this to 9 companies, and 8 of them were all slightly different. So you don't even know if the 10th one that's coming around the bend is going to be similar enough to the past one you did. And you don't know all the zigs and zags that have to come when someone throws questions at you that just you didn't even consider, um, and et cetera, et cetera. So it just takes a lot of repetition, a lot of time to get even somewhat comfortable.
To get somewhat comfortable and to get effective, to
Yeah.
make it work.
Well,
Yeah.
I think those things are really interesting how they intersect. The more
Mm-hmm.
comfortable you get, I've read this before, and I think it's true that really the only true mark of a good salesperson or a bad salesperson, depending how you want to frame it. Let's say a bad salesperson. A bad salesperson is someone that doesn't land the deal they should that was sellable, right? Like I mean, you as a sales coach, I'm sure you hear and see this all the time. Folks do a really good job in the meeting and they blow the follow up. You're like,
Yeah.
well, that job was yours. That mean that sale was yours to lose. It was yours to win. You lost it. You lost it. They were ready to buy, right?
Uh-huh.
Or in the scenario where someone doesn't ask for the sale, they kind of sort of miss. They don't. You know, they. I heard an interesting story of a famous, of a piano player who was so sure that they were not going to get to the final stages of a competition that they didn't even prepare the piece they needed in the finals. And so they got all the way to the finals and they did not know the piece.
Ooh,
Right.
problem.
But that's a really
Yeah.
interesting mental thing. That oftentimes you see people are really good at that first stage. They're really good at getting the meeting. They're really good at doing it, but they're not good at the follow up. So I think that the true mark is, are you good at closing all the deals that are closable? And if you're missing deals that are closable, then that's a mark of being ill prepared for a part of the process or not being a good salesperson. I'm putting that in air quotes because I agree with you that there isn't necessarily inherent sales gene, and there's a lot of things that are
We
learnable.
we uh, piggybacking on what you were just saying, we had a coaching call a week ago for our prospecting program, 3X appointments. Somebody was speaking with a prospect who said that the issue that my client was calling about had been a thorn in his side. And then my client did not ask for an appointment. He just kept talking.
Yeah. Yeah. It is really funny and sort of beautiful how we're sometimes very blind to the needs of the person you're talking to, even though you are the person that is there to try to solve the need. I've even had instances, even though I feel like I've done enough of the sales that I should know better, where I'll think of after a call and be like, oh, I totally missed that. They gave me an obvious in. But I also feel that people are interested. Recently, I've been more and more interested in hard questions. And I think that hard questions are different from sort of guiding questions or questions that are trying to get someone to being receptive to something. A hard question is it's sort of like thinking of the worst case scenario where the worst case relates to you and asking. So something like, okay, well, what happens if you don't hire us at all? And then they say, well, we'll probably just keep doing it how we're doing it. And then you say, okay, well, that's actually a really, really tough sale to make. You asked the hard question and they gave you the truth, which was, yeah, I'm kind of taking this call just to check it out and see if there's something that jumps out at me. And you're like, oof. Yeah, like, but and sometimes if you ask the hardest questions early on in the process, you actually can just relax because you know that really it's not, the sale's not really going to happen. But then sometimes when you pull off the gas early on, like you sort of realize that it's not going to be good, you end up convincing them a lot more because now you're not in any sort of aggressive or sort of forward facing mode. You're actually consulting with them. Okay, well, let's talk about what happened if you did do it yourself. Here's like the 2 or 3 things that we see happen when folks take it on their own and they do that. And then this is the story of when folks come back. Like I just got an email this morning from someone that had I don't know how many sales calls with. They either disappeared or they decided not to buy. Fine. And then they circle back. Oh, actually, one of the things you said might happen actually happened. So now we want to talk again. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I could find the recording of the call and go back. It wouldn't even surprise me if they told me at the very beginning of the call.
Well,
it's very unlikely that we're going to buy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you got this from your musical background, because what I see a lot is many sales professionals are so terrified of being, finger quotes here, rejected, that they don't ask those hard questions. They don't ask any hard questions. And in my experience as a dancer, I've been to dance auditions. I'm not really scared of being rejected because I've been to dance auditions and I've been rejected a lot. I haven't died. Nobody's died. So, and I'm wondering if you learned that in your musical career as well, to that ability to kind of step back and it just, whatever it is, that's what it is. It's not about being rejected or not being rejected.
That's a tricky one. It's tricky because I don't have the same kind of confidence with music as I do with talking to people. So this doesn't feel like work, and there isn't really any rejection that happens, at least in business from my perspective. I think that and I've heard this from other folks, and it rings true to me, that your chances of winning an audition are sometimes much, much higher than landing a sale, because you know that they need someone to fill that dance spot. Someone will win, but almost all the deals that I've quote lost, I didn't lose to anybody. They just sort of didn't hire anyone. They didn't pay anyone to do it.
You lost to the status quo.
You lost to the status quo, right?
Yeah.
So from my perspective, most sales calls are a win, even if you don't win the deal. If you make a positive impression, if you represent your product or service clearly and succinctly, if they walk away knowing something and understanding something a little bit more, if you entertain them, right? I mean, you can imagine if you did an audition and they said, wow, that was really amazing. You're not right for the part for a number of reasons that are only clear to us, but that was really excellent. We really appreciate it. You actually probably feel pretty good. I know that they don't really do that in auditions anyway.
Never.
But you could, that's sort of the feeling that I want. I mean, I have a whole theory that the future of B2B sales really is going to be, it's going to be more about entertainment and education than really about actually selling. Because there's so many ways to buy things without talking to anyone. And if you're going to go through the trouble of actually talking to someone, it better be either entertaining, informative, or a combination of both. Or it's like, why even be on the phone with them?
Right. Agreed.
But anyway, music has interesting elements. I think auditions are one way to do it. But I think that being rejected, I don't know. I just never thought that much about rejection. I'm not sure why. There's something about my personality that same personality trait probably attracted me to music. But it's just not something I think that much about, rejection.
I certainly don't think much about rejection now. When I was dancing, it's just like, go to the next audition. Just go to the next audition. That's it.
Yeah.
you know. So we're going to pause now for a word from our sponsor. But when we come back, I actually want to ask you some questions about email deliverability.
Yeah, sure. We can dig into that.
Cold emailing.
Cold email sounds good.
Yeah. So now a word from our sponsor, the Salesology Vault. And just about every guest that I've interviewed on the Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders podcast has had a free gift for our listeners. And so what we've done is we've taken all of those gifts and we put them all in one place just for you. And we call it the Salesology Vault. It's packed full of free gifts from sales leaders, sales experts, marketing gurus, revenue generation experts. And we add another gift every single week. Every Monday, we release a podcast, and when we do, we add a gift. So you can log in as often as you'd like and download as many gifts as you'd like. It's all free. So the link to the Salesology Vault is in the show notes. As soon as you finish listening to this podcast, go to the show notes, click on the link. You'll be glad you did. And I am back with my special guest, Benny Rubin. He is the CEO of Senders. And I want to start by asking you, is there a difference? What is the difference, if there is one, between, I call it a prospecting email. There's a company you want to get in touch with. But you don't know anybody, so you send out the email versus, which would be a cold email, prospecting email, versus the cold emails the sender sends. Or are they the same thing?
Functionally, there's no difference. I think that we're on a very extreme side of the cold emailing equation. So at the current moment, we serve around 75 or 80 concurrent companies, almost all B2B, almost all of them, or they have a B2B angle, and almost all of them are venture backed, which means they're growth companies. If you are going to do cold email at an industrial scale, your needs are very different and your approach tends to be very different. What do I mean by that? If you're doing a prospecting email and you say, I have a very narrow target. There's these 5 or 10 companies that I really want to get in touch with. You're going to spend a lot of time on each of those emails. It really makes sense to spend time on them. It makes sense to customize them and write an email that's one of one. That's, that basically it's one shot. And the more you can sync that up with something else in the real world, the better. For example, hi, blah, blah, blah. I saw that you're going to be attending conference and you're a speaker. That's so great. I'm going to definitely come see you. I'm going to approach you after you speak and introduce myself. And this is what I'm working on. I'd love to see if there's a way that our teams could work together. See you at the conference. That's an amazing thing, right? Like it's so clear and so succinct, and you're going to the conference, and when you make a beeline up to them after and you introduce yourself, they're going to have read the email and you're already going to have 2 touches with them, and wow. But if you're selling a B2B SaaS product, or you're selling a service that could be for any e-commerce marketing manager in the country or something, you're not really doing that. You're actually sending a cold email that's largely uncustomized, not untested, not ineffective, but largely uncustomized in that same kind of way. My team specializes in facilitating that kind of email. Emails that are effective in their own way, tend to be done at 400 to 4,000 emails per day, tend to be in sequences of 2 to 5 emails, tend to try to get someone to take an action that is usually a reply, like, sure, or something like that. It's not highly customized one of one, usually. So that's the kind of cold email that my team specializes in. And this isn't a value judgment. I'm not saying this is the best kind or the right kind. Really, honestly, it's not the right approach for most businesses, especially businesses that are geographically constrained in some way, or sell a very, very high ticket item or whatever it is. It tends to not be the way to do it. And then the details really matter. what is actually in the email matters. And you might say, well, that's obvious, but it really does, because the value proposition of your company or service might not work over cold email. But that doesn't mean that you can't provide a value proposition that is useful or works well over cold email. So an example of that might be in a case of someone like you or your business, where you might say, we don't like to do mass cold email for whatever reason. We prefer to do much more targeted emails. Great. But you could mass cold email people and see if they, of a certain size and shape, and see if they want to be a guest on your show. And that tends to work very, very well. So that might to change your target audience from 200 companies to 2,000 companies, or 200 sales leaders to 2,000 sales leaders. And sure, you can't accommodate everyone necessarily, but they might be interested in a pre-interview call with you to talk about what you might do together. And that pre-interview call might turn into a sales opportunity, or it might just turn into a great podcast guest. So there's always something that companies tend to find that works at a higher volume, assuming that they can sustain the amount of, there's a lot of work that goes into being able to do high volume cold email. And that's part of the reason why my business exists. But if it's doable.
And you're also not talking about an email list that is opted in.
No, we're not talking about.
These are cold.
Yeah, these are cold. Yeah. So it's a little bit of a gray area there.
Okay. So what are some cold emails do's and don'ts? Like, what should people think about?
I think that blanket advice on cold email tends to be dispensed by companies that have done cold email for relatively few companies. I know that sounds silly to say, but when I had done 5 companies or 10 companies, I thought, yes, this is the template that works. This is this is the perfect thing. But once you start to get to where you've done it for 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 companies, you start to realize that there's a tremendous amount of variation. And we've seen emails that are very long perform much better than emails that are very short, or very short emails perform much better than emails that are very long, or emails that feel very targeted versus ones that are deliberately feel like they're not well targeted, emails that brag a lot, emails that are very humble. So I think the most important thing is that the emails that you're sending don't make you cringe in any way. They don't make you cringe in any way. And all the emails you send do not need any information repeated. Meaning, if your name is in your signature, you don't have to say, hi, my name is at the top, right? If you say, I'm the CEO and founder of blah, if it says that in the signature, you don't need to say that. If your company's called Market Intelligence Group, you don't need to say, we're a market intelligence group. We specialize in market intelligence or something. So you're right. So don't repeat yourself in the body of the email. Don't assume anything about them. You know what they say about assumptions?
I know what they say about assumptions. Correct.
So don't assume anything in your emails. Don't assume you must be busy because your company must be trying to look for ways to cut costs. Those don't tend to work well, especially with Americans. Americans don't like, over email especially, they don't like to be told how they are or how they should be thinking about things or whatever. I think that tends to be a pretty good rule. So don't repeat yourself. Don't assume anything about the person you're emailing. Make it as short as it needs to be. Don't use too many abbreviations. Spell it out for them. And most importantly, explain who you are and what you do. I think if that's not crystal clear, people have a lot of trouble replying. What does that mean? It means do not lead with the why. Do not lead with the why. Whys are great in certain contexts, but they do not make any sense. If the final conclusion of working with Salesology is more sales and less friction, which is amazing. If you say, hi, we're Salesology, we sell more sales and less friction, what comes after that doesn't have anything to do with what you said necessarily. So it confuses people. Well, wait, well, what are you? Are you a software product? Are you a this? Are you a that? Their minds start to race. They don't understand. So it tends to make sense to be very explicit and very clear with what it is that you actually do. And then you can, make your sales pitch in other parts of the email that you explain, like who you've done and why. I also think credibility really matters. So any credibility you have, it's important to sort of bring that forward because they won't have heard of you. And you have to bring your own context. You can't necessarily expect them to go out on the internet and decide if this is an email worth replying to. That's a lot of advice all in one go. So apologies for that.
And no, good advice. And email more than once, I assume.
Sure. Yeah. Email sequencing, I think in a very tense situation, just in a somewhat substantial email and a follow-up 3 to 5 days later, whatever is typical. In certain kinds of markets, people email 3, 4, 5 times in a sequence with some spacing between them. If you're doing a more targeted approach, which meaning you're not doing a large number of people, then it may make sense to pepper in calling steps, LinkedIn outbound steps, other steps like that. Those could definitely boost the efficacy.
Okay. So this has been such an interesting conversation, Benny. And it went actually in ways that surprised me. So
what surprised you most?
Well, I thought we were going to spend most of our time talking about email, and we didn't. We spent most of our time talking about music and dancing and sales.
Yeah. Well, I would say here, I'll give you my general advice that I give to SMBs, so small and smaller businesses that are interested in cold email. Don't go crazy on volume. Think of it as a self-introduction. You can imagine, you remember in the olden days, you imagine like the 1950s, or I lived in Japan, so people still do this. You move into a new apartment building, you bake a batch of cookies, you go door to door, like, hi, we're the Tomlinsons. We just moved in down the street, right? Like, oh, what's this little one's name? Like you kind of introduce stuff to the neighborhood. People don't really do that anymore. Maybe they do. I don't know. Maybe in the South they do it. I don't know. If you haven't done that to your target market, you should. Do it over the telephone. Do it over a cold email. People usually aren't upset to hear from a geographically constrained business of some sort. Meaning, if you launched a catering business and you cold emailed businesses in your general vicinity that you service that just said, like, we recently rebranded, or we recently opened as a catering business, or we've been a catering business here for the last 25 years, and we'd like to introduce ourselves, you'd be really surprised how many people are just happy to hear from you. People like local things. They like local businesses. I think most of the annoyance from cold email comes from the national, nameless, faceless folks trying to sell you something that may or may not be in the strike zone. But if you are a true small business, people actually, that's the kind of cold email that people like. Oh, I didn't know there was a moving company over there. You know what? I actually need to make an office move. Or, oh, thanks so much for your introduction. Yeah, I have a real estate agent that I've worked in the past, but for my second home, I'd love to. Yeah, sure. I'll see the listings you're working on, or whatever it is. It's just be a human and send a self-introduction. You don't need to have a big offer of some sort, because that's just not how humans are.
What sounds to me, correct me if I misheard, but you also seem to be saying your email should sound like a human being wrote it and not like some marketing department somewhere wrote it.
Yes. Now, keep in mind, if you're a sophisticated type of company, then the email should be sophisticated. And if you're a very relaxed kind of company or a relaxed type of person, then your email should be very relaxed in a certain sense. So it's not necessarily one size fits all. For example, if you're an accounting firm, you should email like an accountant, a human, but an accountant.
Right.
We specialize in this, and we pride ourselves on accurate filings, and we provide audit protection for all of our clients. And we find that a lot of clients come to us after they've been in business for a number of years and they're not fully satisfied with their current accounting partner, is a totally acceptable way to write an email, because likely if you met someone at a party, if you're an accountant and you met someone at a party, that is somewhat how you would describe yourself. Where things
like yourself, I'm hearing. Talk like yourself. Whoever you may be.
Yeah. And also, if you feel like there's a lot of stuff that you want to say, like you really want to jam the email packed full of stuff, that's your instinct, then take all that stuff and put it below your signature. And then just say in the email, write a nice short email that's very personal to you, and say, and below my signature, I'll put a whole bunch of other information about the business. just knock it down to the bottom. Because then the email can say, hi, Tom, I'm emailing local businesses in the area because I recently took over my father's accounting firm, and I'm interested in adding a business and getting to know people in the community. I'd love the chance to chat, whether you need an accountant or not. And below my signature, I'll put a bunch of information about the exact services that we do. Wow, that's a really nice email. And you get to say all the stuff that you want to say and you want them to know that you do great audits or something.
Underneath the signature. Got it. So,
and if you want to scale up with volume, you should come to us, because scaling with volume is very tricky. Email deliverability becomes the key issue, and you start to have to care a lot about domains and IP addresses and all this sort of technical stuff.
So if you want to scale with volume, go to Benny.
Come to Senders. We're here to help
Senders. And on that note, if people want to go to Senders, if people want to connect with you, where can they find you?
You can find us online at senders.co. You can email me at benny@senders.co. You can find me on LinkedIn. I have fluffy brown hair. Benny Rubin.
He does.
BNNYRBIN. You can't miss me.
And so we will put the website, the LinkedIn profile, Benny's email address. It's all going to be in the show notes. So as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, go to the show notes, click on the link. And thank you. You've all been listening. Thank you.
Thank you. And also for those listening, if you really need to grow your business, cold email is a tactic, and it can be very effective. Probably holistically connecting with Wendy and her team and learning and having a sort of deeper dive into your sales process and the sales preparation will serve you better than chasing individual tactics. So that's the only thing that I would say. That if you really have insecurities, or you really do need to grow, or you really feel like there's sales dysfunction, working with Wendy and teams like Salesology probably is going to serve you better than saying, I want to blast a bunch of cold emails, or I want to spend a bunch of money on LinkedIn ads, or any sort of individual thing.
Well, thank you for that, Benny. And now I'm going to close out. So I want to thank our audience. Thank everybody for listening to Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders with my very special guest, Benny Rubin, who is the CEO of Senders. And if you found value in listening to today's podcast, then please think about one business owner, one entrepreneur, somebody that you know that you think might also find value in listening to this podcast. And please do share the link with them. And till we meet again, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, really large bills.
You've been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. Be sure to follow so that you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share it with your friends. Tune in every week for more exciting insights and wisdom on transforming sales. And until next time, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, very large bills.